All right, today we're tackling a pretty big idea. We're talking about a kind of sickness, but it's not about our bodies. It's about our society. So we're going to look at the diagnosis and maybe, just maybe, the cure for what's called social malaise.
I mean, have you ever felt that? Like, something is just fundamentally off in our society. You know that feeling of unease where things don't feel quite right, but you can't really put your finger on why? Well, it turns out that's a pretty common feeling, and it actually has a name.
And that word is malaise. It's from the French, mal for bad, and aise for ease, so literally bad ease. And it perfectly describes that vague sense of sickness, or that whole complex web of problems that can plague a country or a society. All right, let's really get into it. So if we're going to treat this like an illness, first we need a diagnosis, right? We have to look at the symptoms. What are they telling us about the health of our world? And when you look at the symptoms, man, they're all too familiar, aren't they? This almost maddening pursuit of wealth and power, widespread corruption, the violence we see, even against the most vulnerable. And what about that loss of human connection, Families breaking up, this deepening social divide, and maybe worst of all, just this indifference to suffering. These aren't just a bunch of random, isolated problems. No, they're all symptoms pointing to a much deeper condition. Okay, so if those are the symptoms, what's the root cause? What's really driving all of this? Well, the argument here is that it all comes down to a massive contradiction, a huge gap between what we say we believe and how we actually live our lives. Let's take a look at what that really means. We have these incredible, profound ideals that have been around forever. Take Vasudeva Kutumbakam, this beautiful idea that the entire world is basically one big family. That's the ideal we hold up, the one we preach. But what does our behavior actually show? And this slide? Wow, this really lays out the great divide, doesn't it? On one hand, we preach one world family. But in practice, we're busy fighting over religion, region, and caste. We talk about ahimsa, or nonviolence, while at the same time, so much violence is committed in the name of those very beliefs. We're taught apargaha, non-hoarding, in a society that basically celebrates accumulating huge amounts of material wealth. You see the pattern here? This huge gap between our words and our actions? That's the real heart of the problem. And here's the thing, this massive contradiction, this hypocrisy, it doesn't just exist without consequences. It creates a void, a deep, hollowing social, moral, and spiritual vacuum, right where our guiding principles are supposed to be. Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, a sick society with a deep moral vacuum, what's the prescription? How on earth do we start to heal? Well, the thinking goes that there's one incredibly powerful tool we can use: education. But here's the catch. It can't be just any kind of education. A report from the Dollars Commission really highlights the big tensions that education has to deal with today. Like, how can you be a citizen of the world without losing your own roots, your own culture? How do you adapt to modernity without just throwing away tradition? And this is a big one. How do we balance the drive for competition with the need for equality and solidarity? And maybe most importantly, how do we find meaning that goes beyond just stuff, beyond the material world? And this really gets to the core of the prescription. Because look, knowledge and skills alone, they're just not enough. We can teach our kids all the facts and figures in the world, but an education without values, well, that just creates really efficient people. It doesn't necessarily create good human beings. And that right there is the missing ingredient. All right, so if value education is the cure, how do we actually administer it? I mean, what does this look like in the real world, in practice? Well, it all starts with the teacher. They are the ones on the front lines of this change, and it's not just about what they teach, it's about who they are. It's about setting an example of simplicity and politeness, having high expectations for every single child. It's about providing a space that feels welcoming and affirming, working with families, and, crucially, taking a stand against injustice when they see it. And the methods for teaching these values are just as important. This isn't about memorizing a list of rules. No way. It's about using storytelling to put values into a context that everyone can understand. It's about leading thoughtful discussions to really deepen that understanding. It's about providing quiet time for reflection so students can connect with their own feelings. And then it's about getting them engaged through activities, things like role-playing or community service, where they can actually live these values out. And what's the ultimate goal of all this? Well, it's to bring us right back to that core ideal we started with. As Karan Singh puts it so perfectly, it's to help us truly understand that the human race is an interlocking, extended family.
Value education, at its heart, is about overcoming those corrosive emotions like hatred and bigotry, and instead nurturing the compassion and cooperation that are supposed to hold our human family together. So it's pretty clear that the process of healing our social malaise can absolutely begin in the classroom. It can start with dedicated teachers and a renewed focus on values. But that leaves us with one final and maybe most important question to think about. Where does our role begin?